Welcome back once again to Get Git, Introduction to Version Control with Git and GitHub. I'm Evan Williamson, Digital Infrastructure Librarian at University of Idaho Library. And this is the sixth video in this series, in this workshop. And the topic now is using branches and forks. So we've set up our demo repository. We learned the basic workflow of git add, git commit, git push, and git pull. We looked a little bit about history using git diff, git log, and looking at that in visual tools, which is helpful. Now we need to look at branching, because branching is really a fundamental concept in Git that really makes it powerful to use and powerful for collaboration and for developing your projects. So the basic idea is that we have our main branch. We've already said branch dozens of times in this workshop series, even though we didn't necessarily describe it. And main is the branch that we've currently been working on. And so that's just kind of the stream of history associated with this one linear branch of our history called main. Now we can actually create additional branches that will have their own independent history it starts as the exact copy of whatever branch you started from. But it's going to end up having its own independent history so that you can start off on this branch from the starting point of your main branch or whatever branch you branch from, but then you can add whatever you want to it without disrupting that branch that you started from. And so in a lot of cases, your main branch is your production level code, your project without any errors that people could go ahead and use. And each branch, you might branch off to be able to experiment in things, and because you don't want to have to disrupt that production code that is already working. Or in a lot of times, you're just opening a branch to do some experimenting or debugging or completely modifying your repository to try out different things while you keep that main branch safely protected by Git. If the exploration that you try in this other branch is a dead end, doesn't work, you can just easily delete it without damaging the history of your main branch. Or if it solves your problems, you can also merge it back in to the main branch, and that's really hopefully what a lot of your workflows are going to be like. So we start from the main branch. We can create a new branch for this to develop this new feature that we have, and then once we have something that works, we can merge that back in to our main branch. And this also works really nicely for collaboration, where perhaps I'm working and I'm doing one part of the project. I have another collaborator who's working on another part of the project, and we did it in parallel. We didn't have the sync. We are not constantly syncing each other's work, but in the end, we can merge back this set of changes, these two different sets of changes from two different branches, and we can merge them all back into the main to keep this project moving forward efficiently and safely with our history. So branching is really powerful, and it should really be an enabler. It makes you feel like you can do interesting things and take some risks with your code, because you can go ahead and experiment in this branch without having to make a whole new copy every time. One thing to keep in mind there is that because essentially Git is just storing these differences, it's actually very efficient to create branches. If you had the traditional way of having all your different file names with different versions, and you wanted to make a copy of all those to try something out, you actually had to copy all those files and put them somewhere. Now your branch is actually just a different history, and you can reconstitute these files by reading the correct series of commits that create the files in the state that they're in your working directory. And so your branches are actually very efficient. It doesn't like double or triple the size of your repository by storing them away. It's only adding a few other commits on a different line of the history, and so Git can switch between those branches very rapidly and efficiently. The command that we're going to start with is Git Branch. There's a little bit of overlap between Git Branch and Git Checkout, so there is a little bit of confusion there. But basically, we can create a new branch using the command Git Branch, and then we're going to use Git Checkout for something that's totally different than what we used it for in our history video. We're going to check out a new branch and work on it. And so let's just go and try to walk through this little demo that we have here. So here's my demo repository again, and here's my terminal where we have been working. And so let's say we're starting off the day. I'm just going to do that git pull, make sure that I have everything fresh off of my remote, which is this GitHub repository here. We always want to do that when we start the day. We might do a git status just to see where we're at. So we're all clean, everything's good, everything's up to date. So what I'm going to do is create a new branch. And so I'm going to use this command, Git Branch, and then we're going to give it, and then space, and then we got to give it our branch a name. And you want to make these branch names, all no spaces in there, no weird characters. So generally it's just going to be lowercase and maybe some dashes or underscores in the name. So I'm just going to give my branch name example. A lot of times, depending on the community that you're working with, who you're collaborating with, you can make these branch names very descriptive so that people know what those branches are all about. But it kind of depends on that community that's working on it. Sometimes there's a convention for how you name the branches based on the way that they're organized. But if you're working with yourself, do whatever you want. So I'm doing Git Branch example-1. And what it did is it created that branch. But if we check git status, you're going to see that it still says we're on the main branch. So we created a branch called example1, and we can check that by just saying git branch with nothing after it, or git branch -- list is the same command. And if I press return on that, it's going to list all the branches that Git knows about in this repository. And so we have 2 branches here, and the one that has this asterisk on it is the one that we are currently using with Git. And so you can see that we created example1, but we're still on the main branch. We're still working inside the main branch. So the files that are in this working repository are still on that main branch, are part of that history. So we actually need to switch over to that example1 branch if we want to start working there. And the way we do that is using checkout. So we're going to do git checkout, and then you can start typing that branch name and do a tab complete. So I click tab and it finished off that name for me, and then I press enter. And now if we do our git status, it says we are on branch example1. So now these files that we have in our working repository and our working directory are on actually a new history. And so any commits that we do right now when we're checked out on this other branch are going to be associated only with this other branch. So we can start working here and do some interesting things, and it's not going to show up in our main branch. It's a totally separate history. So we're safely working in a different line right now. Okay, so let's create a couple commits in this folder of files right now in this new branch that we're working on. So I'm actually just going to open up this notes file. Maybe we're going to add a new line there in this file. I'm going to close that. Maybe I actually just want to create a new file in there. So I'm going to do an echo So I'm creating this new file called new notes.txt. And so you see in my example repository here, I just have this brand new file. So let's do a git status. And we have some changes that we need to stage. So I'm going to do a git add. I'm just going to do them all. So I'm going to do a dash capital A. I'm going to do my git commit message. And I'm going to press enter to make that commit. So again, we're on this example1 branch. We've just created this new file and some changes, and we committed it. And then we have a clean tree once again. So let's go ahead and switch back to our main branch and see what's happened. So if we do a git checkout, and then we say the branch that we want to check out, so main, and I'm just going to tab complete that. Press enter. You're going to see right here in my working directory, that new file that I had just created disappears. It's gone. Okay, because it only exists in that example one branch. The changes that I made there and committed are only in the example one branch. They are not in the main branch. And so the working directory updated accordingly, and we're back to where we were on that main branch. So if we want to do a little bit of a shortcut to not have to do the branch, to create a branch, and then the checkout. This is a little bit shortcut. You might do a Git Checkout -B is a shortcut for a new branch, and then we can just give it a name and press Enter. And in that case, we created that new branch called another branch, and we also switched to another branch at the same time. And so if we do this Git status, you're going to see we're on another branch, and we have a clean working tree. Now we can also, I'm going to check out my main again. Oops. And so I'm back on my main branch, and I can do Git Branch to list all of my branches. And so I can see my 3 branches that I have here, another branch, example 1, and main. And now let's say I want to just delete one of these branches to clean up. So I can do Git Branch -D, and I'm going to do the another branch. I want to delete that one. Now the important thing before you press return here is that once you delete that branch, it is permanent. So unless you've already pushed this branch up onto GitHub, in this case, I'm deleting it permanently from my local machine. On a remote branch, you cannot delete that on your local machine. It's still going to be up there on GitHub. But if a branch that I haven't pushed, so this is, and in this case we haven't, I just created the branch here on my local machine. If I delete it, it is going to be permanently gone. So I'm just going to delete it, and I'm going to do the up arrow to go back through my recent commands, and I'm going to do Git Branch again. And now you can see that I only have the 2 branches, example 1 and main, and I'm currently on the main branch. One other thing that I haven't pointed out so far in the workshop is that in Git Bash, there's actually a lot of helpers built into this terminal, and so you're going to see that it's already listing what branch I'm on in this nice bright colors. You might not be seeing that at all in Mac or on Linux because the little Git helpers aren't built in. You also see that my main branch is nicely colored green for me, and so those little helpers are just kind of highlighting that's added in because Git Bash is really focused on being a Git terminal and nothing else. So you might not see that if you're using a different terminal today. Let's say now that we've created some really great content in example 1. We know that I added that other file that was a really good one, and we want to get that back into our main branch. So the command that we need to do that is called Git Merge, and it's going to combine the histories of the 2 branches together, and Git is going to use its own sort of tools and algorithms to figure out how to do that correctly. And if it finds some kind of issue where 2 lines are changed in both repository, it's going to call that a merge conflict, and it's actually going to alert you to that problem and make you, the human being, solve it and decide which is the correct thing to merge together. But if your histories are parallel and do not have any conflicts in them, the merges can be completed automatically. So there's a lot to merges, and they can be a little bit intimidating. But in a basic merge like we've just set up here, we should be able to do it without any problems. So I'm just going to create another new branch just to demonstrate one more time. So I'm going to do the Git Checkout -B, new branch, and in this new branch I'm going to again create a new file. And I'm going to pipe that into a file called newfile.txt, press enter. You can see over here in my folder, I have this new file called newfile.txt. And again, I just did that on the command line. It's unrealistic, but I just wanted to do it quickly. So it's just for demonstration purposes. We can see that we are on this new branch. So this is where this new file has happened. We're going to do our git add. I'm going to add all those changes that we've done. I'm going to do my git commit and give a message. So I'm going to add new file demo. I'm going to press return to make that commit and store it away. So now I have some new things in my new branch. So now I'm going to switch back to the main branch, which is where I want to merge this new branch into. So I need to have the branch that I want to be the main branch that I'm going into checked out. So I got to check out main. Okay, so now I'm back on my main branch, and you can see again in my repository that one new file that I had just created in that other branch is gone. It disappeared because it's not part of the history of the main branch. But now if I want to pull that history out of that branch that I had just set up and bring it into the main, we can do that by using merge. So we're going to do git merge, and then you had to give the branch name. So we're going to try a new, I'm going to tab that, and it just completes it. And then if I press enter, it's going to start that merge. And it goes ahead, because there's no conflicts or anything, it's able to immediately make the merge, and it's essentially a new commit message that we've merged these two branches, or we've merged these commits into the history of the main. Now, because so we can do this git branch to see all our branches again. Now I've just merged all the history from new branch into main. And one thing just to keep yourself clean, your history clean, is to go ahead and just delete that branch, because that history is already merged into main. So you pretty much want to be done with that branch now. So we're going to do a git branch D and new branch. I'm going to go ahead and delete that. There we go. So we're all cleaned up. So that's creating a branch, merging that branches back in to your main or to any other branch that you want it to go. The one thing that is a bit confusing about branches is so far we've done all of this on our local machine. And if I go over here to our repository on GitHub and we look at the main thing, you're going to see that there is this branch tag right here. I can click on there, and it still only shows one branch. There's a main branch. And if I look on my local, we just saw that I still have two branches on my local. And I can do my Git Push. And I'm on the main branch right now, and I'm going to do my Git Push. So that's going to push the history from the main branch up to the main branch here in our repository. And you're going to see that these new sets of commits that I just created are here. But we can go back to this branch tab, and you're going to see again, there's only the main branch there, even though on my local, I do have two branches. And this is because branches actually are a local phenomena until you combine, or until you push them up to your remote. And so there's quite a bit of details here about how that kind of works. But you can create a branch either on your remote or on your local, but to get them to show up in each other, you do have to push them or pull them to have those branches show up. So the branch that you have that's actually already connected to that repository on GitHub, we call a tracking branch. So right now, my only tracking branch is the main. And when you clone your repository down from GitHub, that one's just automatically set up for you as a tracking branch. If there is other branches on that remote, when you do that clone, it doesn't automatically set all those branches up on your local machine until you ask for them. And so if the branch exists on GitHub and your history is up to date, and then you do a Git Checkout, and you use the exact branch name that exists on GitHub, it'll automatically create that branch for you from the version that is on that remote. Otherwise, it's going to set up a new branch that's just local and specific to you. Now, this is because a lot of times you're going to create branches in your local work. You create a branch, do some work, and then merge it down all on your local machine, and then you're going to push that up to GitHub. But in a lot of workflows, what you want to actually do is do your work on your local machine in a branch and then push that branch up to GitHub, because maybe you're going to work on that branch tomorrow. But also for a lot of workflows, you want to be able to put those branches up so that your collaborators can review those branches before they merge back in to the main code. So if we want to get our local branch up onto GitHub, we actually have to do a push as well. So I'm going to do check out my example branch once again. And so now I'm on my example branch. And if I want to send that up into my remote, if you do a git push, it's not going to immediately work. So I can just try it. And Git says you can't do that because there isn't an upstream branch yet. This isn't a tracking branch, it's only a local. And then it gives you a suggestion on what you should do. And you can just follow that suggestion. This is one of the nice things about Git. As you've seen, there's built-in help. There's almost always a suggestion of what you should do next. And so you can just follow this here. There happens to be a shortcut in this case. In a simple repository like this, we can actually just do a git push and then say origin and then the name of the branch that we want to push it up to. And that's enough to do what we want. And so if I do that and I press enter, this is going to push this local branch up into the remote, and it'll now be a new tracking branch. So if I hop over to GitHub again and I refresh this page, you can see that we now have two branches available to work with. We have a main branch and we have the example one branch. The important part about that, one more note about these branches, is that if you do a git pull in one of your branches when you've got one checked out, so right now we're on the example one, it's going to pull the updates for that branch in particular and update your working directory for that branch. But it doesn't necessarily do that for all the branches in your repository. So if you go and check out a different branch, you still might need to do a fresh git pull to refresh your working directory depending on the state of your repository. So always do your git pulls when you're starting out, checking out, and particularly if you're checking out an older branch that you need to get updated. So generally, I try to push up all my branches onto that remote because particularly if you're collaborating with people, because it's a really good way to do your work. And one of the things that we can do in this branching workflow is use on GitHub a thing called pull request. So rather than that merge that we just did on our local machine, and we didn't really have to discuss it, or we didn't have to write a big commit message to do that merge, we can do that same operation using a pull request on GitHub. So if I'm here on my main repository page, and it's giving me GitHub is actually giving me a hint that this pull request is a good idea right now. There's two branches, and it's saying example one was recently pushed to. So I just pushed that branch up, and it's saying, why don't you give it a try with this compare and pull request? So we can also access that if we go over to this branches page and we click over to example one. Now I'm on GitHub, and you can see right here there's this drop down that lets you switch between branches on GitHub. And so right now I'm on GitHub and I'm looking at the example one branch, just like as if I did the Git Checkout in my local repository using the command line. And it's offering again this ability, this hint saying, open a pull request, or we can do it here with this little contribute drop down where it says open pull request. And so opening a pull request is essentially the same kind of activity as doing that git merge, only we're going to do it in a sort of public way in our repository. And so I'm going to click that open pull request, and you can see this looks a little bit like an issue, and it has a title. It's showing what this merge is going to be. So remember when we did the merge using the command line, we checked out the branch that we wanted to merge into. So we are checking out main. So our base is called the main. And the one that we are merging from is this example one. We're going to pull example one and put it into the main history. And so we get a title. We can describe this to our collaborators. And then we click the green button to create that pull request. And so what happens is this pull request, or a PR, as it's often called on GitHub, is going to show a kind of summary of everything that this merge is actually going to do, which makes it really nice if you've done a whole series of commits on your branch, to really summarize exactly what changes are going to happen when we pull this branch and put it into our main. And so this is a really nice way to be able to visualize what's going to happen. And then our collaborators can also go in here and make some comments. So they can say, it sounds like a good idea. Or they could say something like, we need some work on this thing to make sure that this is okay. And so you want to have these conversations with your collaborators and kind of a record of what's going on, why it's going to happen, right here, situated in the code rather than in some email chain somewhere else where it can get confused and lost. So you all have it exactly right here, situated together in the context of this code so that we can understand exactly what we're talking about, what changes are going to be made. And you can see that there's these two files that were changed. We can see the different parts of the files that were changed. We can see a whole list of the commits that are different, that are going to be added to our history. And then we can have this conversation with our collaborators about this pull request and see if it makes sense in our context. And so if everything's looking good, let's scroll down in our pull request, and it says everything's good. There's no conflicts that need to be sorted out. GitHub does have a little interface that you can kind of use that same web editor to fix up the conflicts in the web editor if there are some involved in this merge. And if everything's okay, then we're ready to merge. There's a green button, merge that pull request. And I'm just going to go ahead and click that. And then it's going to, because this pull request is going to be, this merge is really a commit, we have to give a message, we can give a description, and it's associated with you, and then you got to have a green button, confirm that merge, and that merge goes ahead and happens. And then you can see it's given us another example, just like I said when we did it on the command line. We've pulled that branch in. It's safely, all the history from that branch is now safely part of our main branch, so we can go ahead and delete example 1. And so it's giving me a little quick button right here to be able to do that, and so I went ahead and did it. And so now if we go back, take a look at our code, and we look at our commits, we're now on the main branch again, and you can see that this pull request is a merge commit, and we have it here so that we can go back and take a look at exactly what happened with that pull request and what it introduced into our code. So pull request is a really good way to collaborate and to work with other people in your repository and continue to have that kind of transparency and clear history of what has happened and discussions about why changes were made and merged into the main branch of your code. So there's a lot of different workflows that are based around branching and managing branches in different ways. And the one that I kind of just described to you with creating a branch, doing some work, creating a pull request, discussing it, and then merging it in is called the Github Flow. So there's, if you want to learn more about those workflows, there's some links in the outline here that will describe how you can implement that with your team. And there's a lot of other kind of little twists and tweaks to that, and so there's some you might want to search out there for some other types of workflows that people use to organize their team. So it's really about this pragmatic workflows, making sure that it works for the people that you're collaborating with, that it's not too complicated, that you don't get your work done, but it is have controls in it so that you can have some transparency of the edits that you're doing, what's changing, and it's really going to help your ability to develop and maintain and understand bugs that happen over time. The last thing that I want to cover here is the idea of a GitHub fork. And so you've probably seen this. This is a really famous feature of GitHub. There's a button right up here called fork. And fork is a GitHub feature. It is not part of Git, but it is designed essentially for the workflow that's exactly the same as that kind of branching and pull request workflow that I just described. But it's for collaborating with people who don't have access to your repository. So if this repository is it is public, so anyone can go see this repository, but it is owned by me, and only I can push and edit to the files in here. Now, if somebody else wants to collaborate with me or provide some contributions to this repository, I don't need to give them access to it. In fact, they can essentially make their own branch by creating a fork. So they click the fork. It's going to create an exact copy of this repository under their account so that they own it now. They can edit their forked version of it, but the fork is going to maintain a connection back to my repository. And so when they go ahead into their fork, they'll create a new branch and they'll start making some edits in that fork. And then when they want to contribute back to my project, they'll open a pull request, and it's a pull request coming from their version of my repository, their fork, into my repository. So it's exactly that same workflow where you create a branch, do some work, and then make a pull request to get that merged back into the main. But a nice thing about this fork workflow is that it allows people who don't have access to your repository, you don't have to let them have administrative rights to your repository, but they can still contribute in a meaningful way. So this is one of the little kind of features of GitHub, which has really enabled the open source community to do contributions to all kinds of different projects and really kind of open that up to the public without needing those kind of access rights. And so you open your pull request and say, hey, I've done these changes and this is why. Go ahead and pull this into your main, and they will review it and let you know if it makes sense for their project. And so this is a really common workflow. It's a common way of contributing. Many of the projects that you see out there on GitHub will have a contributing guide with some details exactly how they want these contributions to be set up, how you want a template for the issues that you might submit to them. And so this is a really positive thing for opening up open source to more people and opening up the ability to contribute, or opening up people to have the ability to contribute to your projects. So learning a little bit about that I think is a positive thing as well. So that was a lot. I mean, we covered all these Git basics. We covered looking at that history, and we covered branches. And then I've thrown in there a number of little demos, both with the command line and using my editor, Visual Studio Code. And so as I said, I do a little bit on the command line, and I mix it up with a lot of doing some of this work on Visual Studio Code or other integrated development environments. And so you're going to come up with a pragmatic workflow of using Git that really works for you, that works for how you're going to work on your project and collaborate with others who are also working on it. So, just you don't need to get fancy to use Git and start building version control into your project, but I think that it will really help you manage your project, collaborate with other people, and sustain the project in the future, because you'll have a much better understanding of how all of this code got to the state that it currently is in. So those are the reasons why using Git and GitHub are really going to be transformative to making your research and your code better. So one last thing for this workshop today is just to go ahead and take a look at these learning resources. Remind you one more time that you can add --help to any of your Git commands to get some direct help from Git itself. There's a Git book that has really detailed information in there. It's kind of a little bit intimidating, high-level stuff sometimes, but it can really help with a lot of examples that show you exactly what these commands can do. The GitHub guides are a really good quick reference, and then you can do these GitHub Learning Lab tutorials, which will carry you through in an interactive method. Software Carpentry is a really great organization that's teaching basic computing and research skills all over the world. You can look for your organizations near you that will host those Software Carpentry sessions. We do it at University of Idaho on a regular basis. And they have 2 lessons about learning the Unix shell, which is that Git bash that you would use on Windows, or the terminal on Windows and Mac, or on Mac and Linux. And they also have a lesson on version control with Git. And a lot of those lessons is actually what I've based Git on, and I've also contributed back into that organization. And there's some tutorials on Bitbucket, which I think are good quality, and then there's also the quick reference here in this repository in case you just want to remember what those commands all are. And as I said multiple times, you will probably in the future want to use some visual app for doing a lot of the Git operations that you do on a daily basis. There is some specific Git helpers. The most popular is probably Github Desktop, which is a product from GitHub, and it's essentially like using that GitHub web interface right on your computer, but it only does the Git tasks and lets you visualize your commits and your diffs and all that kind of stuff. So it integrates very well with GitHub. If you're using a different source provider, GitHub Desktop is not as good, but there is a lot of other ones like SourceTree, which are generic Git interfaces that let you do all those kind of all these kinds of commands and visualizations that can be really helpful for understanding what's going on with Git. But for myself, I've not ever ended up finding those all that useful, and what I found the most useful is just the integrations directly with my text editors, because I'm mostly working in my text editors. And so I use Visual Studio Code. It has this nice source control panel built in, and you're going to do your git add and git commits right there in that source panel. You don't leave and go somewhere else to do that work. And then I typically do my git pull and my git push in the terminal so that I can get the output that Git will provide. So you can just come up with what works for you. There's lots of integrations for RStudio and other types of integrated development environments such as that. So just look out in your community of other people who work on the kinds of projects that you work on and see what they do, and come up with something that's going to seamlessly allow you to build this version control into the work that you do, so that you don't have to keep making goofy file names and all of that. So thank you for joining up in Git and following along in this workshop. I hope to have a few more videos on specific things such as a merge conflict. So look for those coming in the future, and I'll post them in the resources page when they're available. Thanks, and do take care.